know, Pepsi, that you own Frito-Lay, but like, hey, cross promotion is a thing.
Coca-Cola. Jumping
Well,
into the Coca-Cola promotion. That's bold.
they got the money, man. You got to get that money.
So we are live, Dixon.
Mhm.
How are you doing? Good?
Crunchy.
Okay.
I'm doing
There we go.
crunchy.
There we go. So so this week we were going to talk about Scott Peterson, and we will be talking about Scott Peterson because there is, I think you and I were talking about, there's a natural progression with the Scott Peterson case and some of the, I guess, the reasonable doubt conversations that have come up from Casey versus Darley, our last two cases. But last night I couldn't sleep. And the reason I don't know why I couldn't sleep, but I ended up checking the news and I started to read about this Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie case. And I was absolutely captivated by it. And I was a bit torn as to whether we should cover this because it is an active investigation. Gabby is still missing. It's very sad. And I decided that I think it's best that we do work through the timeline because it's something we're going to talk about, but I want to do so respectfully. And we're going to be looking at the timeline and we're going to be talking about the body cam footage. You said you've seen some bits about this as well.
Yeah, I have. I'm familiar with the basics of the narrative. I have not seen the body cam footage, so I'll be interested to see that. But I know what it shows,
Yeah.
and it does. I mean, I think by her own admission, in that body cam footage, we're dealing certainly with some mental health issues around this case.
Yeah.
And you know what? If you're a true crime fanatic out there, I mean, the behavioral cycle that, from what I've read, that the body camera footage describes, it sounds very familiar. If you're familiar with people like, what's the name of that? The one with the hotel in Los Angeles that we discussed covering, but we haven't. The Netflix show is
the
about
staircase, not the staircase, the Cecil Hotel, and I can't remember her name.
Right. Or Mara Murray, for those of you who are familiar with the Mara Murray case. Although she was traveling alone and disappeared, Mara, was having some kind of a mental episode, clearly, in her final days. What we presume are her final days because she is still missing. And it's just, it's sad when you see echoes of those, and people who follow these things and are interested in these things. You start to see those patterns, and it's scary. It's scary.
Yeah, and by the way, this is a clip from their one and only YouTube video that they've uploaded, about their journey before they got to that point. And the one thing I want to talk about when you talk about that mental health cycle, and it was obvious when you watch the actual body cam footage that specifically that there were things going on in the background. And we'll go into it in the timeline. But one thing I want to talk about is that body cam footage doesn't necessarily lead you down the route that, most people have come to a conclusion on right now. And what I want to be clear on, and I'm going to sort of go to the end point now, because I want to make that clear now. My view on Brian Laundrie is somebody who is, his behavior is quite damning. And my problem with his behavior now is if you compare it to, let's say, Scott Peterson, who we're going to be talking about. Scott Peterson took counsel to not take a lie detector, not really work with police to a high degree, or not communicate to them to the degree that they probably would have liked. Yet he kept searching for his wife. If we throw the result away, whether he's guilty or innocent, Brian Laundrie, and we're going to learn about this relatively soon, is on the run as of this past Tuesday. So he has information. He has gotten counsel and has decided not to speak, but he's buggered off, and he's the only one that has information to find Gabby. And that's unnerving for me because it tells me that something went down that he's not willing to talk about.
I mean, that's the obvious conclusion to draw.
Yeah.
I mean, you certainly don't want to see somebody who has, if he had nothing to hide, and he obviously is the only person, as you say, likely to have information. And even if, let's say, for the sake of argument, that after she spent that night at that hotel, that she wandered off, and that he didn't see her after that, like, he should be there to say everything that he knows. That's what you'd want to see. And it's a shame.
Yeah, everything's fine. We just I'm not going to speak to the police, but Gabby's fine. and he hasn't said that, and that's problematic. So no matter what I say here, making observations or you, I wanted to make sure that conclusion was there, because nothing Gabby has done, has elicited this type of outcome, whatever that may be. So I just wanted to throw that disclaimer out there. So what I thought we'd do is start with the timeline, because for anybody who's coming into this case for the first time and watching us, so July the 2nd is when they headed out on their trip of a lifetime. Now the van is owned by Gabby, and it was a big moment for them. They're not newlyweds, but I think they're engaged, and they were heading out in their 2012 Ford Transit van, and as of the 9th, there's, I guess, the first sort of timeline component where Gabby published a photograph of herself on Instagram. Well, she took a picture of herself at the Arches National Park in Utah, which she published on the 12th. Now, the 12th is when that altercation happened, that there's police body cam footage of. And you haven't seen it, but what was your reading on it? What did you learn about it from when you read about that body cam footage?
Sorry, I was on mute. What I learned, because I'm also looking, as we're talking, I'm looking at sources too, just to keep myself fresh. What I gather that the video shows is somebody who's in a high state of agitation. She, from what I've read during the entire interview with the police, I don't know if the entire thing is on the body cam or not, but the police officer reported that at no point during the interview did she seem to really gain control of herself completely. That, in fact, Brian Laundrie can be seen at one point suggesting she take a walk, go get herself calmed down, seems to be indicating something of a calming presence or an attempt to suggest those things, and that she remains in a highly agitated state. And that, so that the video would therefore seem to show, apparently they both acknowledge that she hit him. And they both deny that he laid a hand on her. Apparently Brian Laundrie also showed evidence of other injuries, so that perhaps obviously suggesting that there had been more than one altercation or time when she may have gone after him physically.
Yeah.
And that, so all of that obviously adds up to somebody. And listen, you put two people in a van that wasn't meant to be an RV, but you're running it like it's an RV for 6 weeks. I can see people getting on each other's nerves.
Yeah, it's especially a young couple. It's really hard when you're. I know you and I. We have experience with that, and it's difficult when you're learning to live together for the first time,
for sure,
especially in the circumstances they are.
Yeah, they've elected some very difficult. I mean, you'd think that their youth and the fact that they're in love would help them to get through it, but at the same time, they have elected some fairly difficult circumstances. And anyway, all of this is to say, the video would seem to indicate, from what I've read, that Brian Laundrie was doing his best to deal with somebody who was struggling mentally.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say, and I think you'd agree with that, it's difficult to really get any sort of proper conclusion on that, because it's perfectly feasible. And we know many cases where people haven't reported abuse.
Of course.
A bit of Stockholm syndrome. And because she isn't bruised, beaten up, and because she hasn't said it doesn't mean there isn't some sort of, mental abuse happening. I mean, She does reference at about this point here that she's a bit OCD, and she was giving Brian a hard time because, and this is what she's saying right now, he had dirty feet when he was getting into the van. And when you look at that van, and we saw images earlier, it was really tidily put together. It was,
I was impressed. I was way more impressed than I thought. Like when I read what it was, I was like, okay, boy, that's going to be something. And then they did a bang up job, I have to say.
It's an incredible. Because I'm thinking about getting a van like that myself, and I'm just. It's a great setup they have there, and it takes somebody who's quite organized and quite structured to make a space like that work, especially for as long as they have.
Yeah.
But this starts. I'm going to go back just a little bit, and I will put the sound on in a bit. It's just very difficult to hear. So the day before, they were seen having a bit of a row, and we're going to come back to that. But this police officer saw them driving erratically, drove behind them, and then all of a sudden really puts on the speed, gestures for them to pull over because he bumped up onto a curb. Now, the story was, and there was some conflicting reports, but generally speaking, they were fairly consistent, that she either punched him in the arm to get him to pull over or pulled on the steering wheel, and that's why they hit the curb. Either way, he was distracted and pulled over. Now, she gets out, they separate the two, and then they start to interview them. Now, over the course of the interview, we see Brian get out of the car separately. And during this interview, and you can even see it here, he's got scratches on his face and his arm. You can actually see the scratches on his face right there. And that came about the day before. So I think this van is a very central piece to this. It's her van, it's her space, and these two are married, but I think she,
not yet.
I'm sorry?
They're not. They postponed their wedding, didn't they?
Oh, sorry. They're engaged. Apologies. No, I misspoke there. But it's kind of a sacred space. I would guess, having been somebody who does. I have a caravan, so very similar to that. It's kind of your space, and you take a lot of pride in that. And the day before, they were fighting, and Brian had locked her, as you said, out of the van, and he had gotten those injuries according to the both of them. I think she had managed to sort of scrape and scratch her way into the car. And he had scratches up his arm and on her face. And that was the altercation with her trying to get in, and he was trying to lock her out and ask her to cool down because according to the both of them, she wasn't quite happy. Now, I don't know how correct that story is. Just because Gabby has agreed with that doesn't mean that necessarily is what happened, but this is why he has those scratches. Now, fast forward a little bit I've timestamped this, and I'm going to turn the volume on. The police officer that's dealing with it runs into this gentleman right here, and this gentleman has intel from the day before, and he's referring to that story, and he's corroborating that with what both Gabby and Brian have said. So I'm going to play that now. And then share screen.
Well, while we're waiting, I'm noticing, just to piggyback on what you were saying, this video is 1 hour and 17 minutes long.
Yes.
And so on the one hand, that's a lengthy space of time to kind of observe, people you don't know and in stressful circumstances. But on the other hand, it's 1 hour and 17 minutes out of a 6-week trip.
Yeah.
So to your point, you can try to draw some conclusions from this, but it's best to be careful about how much you draw.
Yeah,
based on he's in front of police officers. If he's not the one who's feeling upset or agitated, it's easier for him to calm down in front of police officers. Maybe he just has that personality that he knows he has to put on a show now.
Yeah.
Maybe he's a completely different person when the police aren't there, when the cameras aren't rolling. All very possible.
So let me know if you can hear it, by the way. I'm going to hit play again.
Mm-hmm.
You got it?
I can hear it.
Okay.
Do you mind hanging with him for a minute?
So yeah, the guy in the body cam, I guess, is I don't know if it's a state trooper, but he's the one that's taking charge. This is a police officer, and then there's park rangers there as well.
He never saw the male strike the female. He saw the male trying to lock her out of the vehicle. She even told us that he was trying to lock her out, tell her to go take a walk, so that she was trying to get in. She eventually couldn't get in and actually clawed her way in through the driver's door. He says, I don't understand why she's doing that. Well, I think it's because it was the only door that wasn't locked that she could get through. She's trying to get in over him. He's trying to disengage from her. I guess he hung her backpack on the back probably so she would have her shit so that he didn't have to engage her. Everything she's saying is the same thing. I haven't heard what he said, but if that's what he said, it's also what the witness is saying. The witness says, I never saw him hit her. I saw him shove her, but I couldn't tell if it was an aggression against her or a defense against her, as far as her, being the aggressor. So at this point, unless the guy's screaming that he needs to go to jail and did something to this girl, it sounds to me like she is the primary aggressor.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with her being the primary aggressor, in an instance of domestic assault, be it a male or be it a female, we shall arrest. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they have to go to jail. We can do a citation if it meets one of 3 criterion, which one of them is that we can ensure that they're not going to further risk each other's safety. But the problem with that is they live in the same vehicle.
That's what I was going to say. The other part of it is
there was actually an injury to the victim, which is him.
Right. And I'm getting conflicting stories about why they hit the curb up here.
And I'm going to let this play, but that's whether she punched him in the arm or he pulled the arm down. And with this police officer saying it's fairly consistent, whether he punched her, he turned, there was some action that was taken, and they both agreed that the action was her trying to get him to pull over. But it's an interesting point.
Detail. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No,
I had a question. I have a clarifying question, which maybe you know the answer to. One detail that's not entirely clear to me is that I thought that following this incident that they arranged for her to stay in a hotel that night, and then she apparently also disappeared from a hotel on the 24th. So what, she was able to get hotels on different nights? Is that what's happening here?
So, well, what happened? So we'll get more or less. She didn't get the hotel. He ended up going into the hotel, and I'll come to that in a second, because that was where they ended up. They had to be separated. Mm-hmm. So over the course of the next half hour, the police officer in question is the one who's got the authority, and this gentleman here is advising, and they're correctly pointing out that even though, and I think if we go ahead, and they're saying to him, look, you're a much bigger dude and she's tiny. But that's not how it works. We can't, just because he's bigger doesn't mean that, we have to assume that you can take care of yourself, because we've seen plenty of cases where smaller, females have abused males, and it's been quite traumatic for them. So they have to not look at it as a male female thing, but as a domestic abuse thing. And this is no disrespect to Gabby. I'm just talking, and this is why I wanted to put the disclaimer. I'm just talking about this video, this case, what we're talking about, the police body cam. So they're essentially saying, look, we may have to do something here. We may have to cite her, which means she is going to have to go into jail, and you're going to need to find a place to stay till tomorrow. Court's not going to be till Monday. And he's saying, look, there's no problem here. We're just having a fight. We love each other. And eventually this police officer goes back to, I think it's the state trooper, and says, look, it's 50-50. And they end up asking her, were you intending to hurt, or were you trying to get in? And I think this is where there's a bit of gray area here. So they ask him, if you have any money, can you stay in a hotel? He's like, I don't really have any money. I'll just take my backpack. She can have the van, give her the van. I'll just drop me off somewhere, and I'll find somewhere to go. So eventually they help arrange for him to have a hotel, and she heads off in the van, which we see towards the end here. But they say to her, they're not going to cite her. They're going to send her on her way. And they're putting him up for the night. So that's where things were left off. And this was I think this really goes to show, when you look at every case, there's no specific guideline to how things come to fruition in a very negative way. In this case with Gabby missing, because the police officers today must be really reassessing the work they did. And watching this, I can't really fault the work that they did. Now, I'm not a professional. I can't assess that. But when I watched this as well, I didn't view Brian as anybody other than somebody who was trying to be patient with Gabby, who's struggling with a bit of OCD. She said that he's trying to be patient. Now, that's not to say that's the case, but that's the impression I got, and that would be the impression the police got.
Yeah, I mean, from everything you were saying and from what I've read, again, that just comports with my impression and understanding. And now that I'm looking at the video, I mean, yeah, his body language is basically relaxed. He's smiling at times. He looks like he's trying to, just work it out with them and tell them, that, and as I understand, both parties, especially her, were interested in not escalating this in a legal sense. Yeah. And, if you're the police officers and you got two young kids, sometimes young kids, they fight, I mean, they do. Yeah. And it's true. And especially if it's the woman hitting the man, and that's all they can know and prove, and no one's claiming otherwise, you're exactly right. He has nothing to really fear from her, in all probability. And especially if he's telling them that he'll be fine. You know what I mean? Like, it'd be one thing if he said, listen, you need to separate me. I think she's unhinged. She has a weapon, something to that effect. He says none of this. So I think the officers really were trying to behave compassionately in a situation that was, that they were sort of drawn into. And they're basically being told by the people who drew them in that we don't really need you or want your involvement. That would just cause problems that neither one of us need, and we can work this out. and they tried to behave compassionately and let them work it out, while at the same time I think they did a great thing in finding. And now you're right. I realized that was what I misread, that he spent the night in the hotel originally. But they behaved that extra level of compassion, like helping him, even though he had no money, get a hotel so that he could stay someplace and they could have a cooling off period. That was the right thing to do. And I don't see anything here, to fault any way that this was handled by the officers. No.
Yeah. And the amount of pressure, I mean, I part of me feels for them, because they are most certainly going to be, analyzing their behavior. For
all we know, I mean, yes, they're going to be analyzing their behavior, but to be completely fair, we don't know anything about where Gabby is.
No,
the fact that he's not talking is, it's suggestive, but it's not conclusive.
And anybody who's watched this now, we have 94 subscribers now, and we have quite a few people watching our videos. You and I are quite liberal when it comes to not making a judgment on behavior, because you can't really get you can't get any definitive conclusions based on unusual behavior, or, like you said, a 1 hour and 17-minute snapshot in time. But
especially in the middle of a heated argument, you don't judge people based on how they are when they're at their most agitated, which, if I'm an officer and I show up, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a young woman frustrated with her boyfriend. Maybe she's, a little over the top with the defeat or whatever, but she's obviously not. This is not how she is all the time. No one could be that way all the time, right? So.
And I walked away, I think, impressed with how the police worked together and how they communicated, and gave them the space they needed. And it's just unfortunate things unfolded the way they did. So, and that all happened so this is on the 12th. On the 23rd, 24th. Now they did publish their video on the 19th. And then on the 23rd or 24th, I think Gabby's mother and stepfather spoke to her last on a FaceTime call. He said Gabby told them that she and Mr. Laundrie were leaving Utah and driving to Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. And then her stepfather said Gabby texted her a few more times after that. Now, I found, and this was on a totally different stream, actually, I found an image that highlights something that happened. Actually, before I do, I want to play a video, because over the course of, I think, the next few days, Brian and Gabby somehow get separated. And then I think on that sort of right around that 24th time, Brian is found backpacking on his own, and he pays somebody $200 for a ride. And I have actually video. It's somebody who's a TikToker who travels.
It was the 29th, actually. So it's 5 days, 29th, 5 days after she last confirmed sighting, it would seem.
So I found this timeline. I don't know how accurate it is. So in the comments, if you see this, let me know if this is at all accurate. I'm going to share my screen. So 25th, 26th, they were speaking to a shop owner, or I think it was at a cafe, about the entrance to Yellowstone. And then, 29th, you're spot on with that. But this shows the area where Brian was picked up and dropped off. And then this is the area where the van was last seen, I believe, in this area here. So what I'll do is I'll play, because I actually have the interview of the woman who's part of the couple who gave them a ride, and she talks about that story, which it's interesting to say the least.
Night at Cold. Hi, my name is Miranda Baker, and on August 29th, my boyfriend and I picked up Brian at Grand Teton National Park at 5:30 at night at Coulter Bay. I'm hoping this can help someone identify him, because I saw him from TikTok, which then made me call the authorities, and my boyfriend and I have been in contact with a bunch of different people to help piece together different parts of this case. But we picked him up at Coulter Bay, like I said, at 5:30. He approached us asking us for a ride because he needed to go to Jackson, which we were going to Jackson that night. So I said, hop in. He hopped in the back of my Jeep. We then, proceeded to make small talk. But before he came in the car, he offered to pay us like $200 to give him a ride, like 10 miles. So that was kind of weird. He then told us he's been camping for multiple days without his fiance. He did say he had a fiance, and that she was working on their social media page back at their van. Then once, like, in conversation, I brought up, yep, like, we're going to Jackson. He freaked out. He's like, nope, I need to get out right now. Like, pull over. So we pulled over at the Jackson Dam, which I don't know if you know, like, Teton Park, but it's not very far from Coulter Bay. And if this does, like, reach people, I can post pictures of, exactly where we were. We picked him up and the whole route or whatever, and, like, screenshots of, like, the timestamps. We dropped him off at 6:09 p.m. on August 29th. He kind of, like, hurried out of the car, and then he's like, okay, I'm just gonna go find someone else to, hitchhike. And we're like, okay. It was a weird situation. So when we picked him up, he was wearing a backpack. He had a long sleeve pants, hiking boots, and he had, like, scruff. But he didn't look dirty. For someone who was camping for multiple days, like, he didn't look dirty. He didn't smell dirty. So that part was kind of weird. And I'm just really hoping that they find her. And this helps someone, like, remember seeing him or, something like that.
So interesting.
Interesting.
It's a weird thing to do, especially if you're trying to keep a low profile, to pay $200 for a ride. And then I don't know if maybe
when he's already in the back seat, right?
Yeah, well, he met what they had said, and I didn't play the video. They met at I guess, I don't know if it was a truck stop in the area. There was showers and facilities. There was, like, a rest area, and they said they spoke with him. This is the same person. This woman and her partner said he was really nice, needed a ride. I think that's where he offered him $200, and that's where they took him. It only went about 10 miles down the road before he's like, no, let me out here. But it's not very inconspicuous to pay $200 for a ride to somewhere that's not too terribly far away. So you're really going to stand out by doing that.
Yeah. I mean, everything about that story is because it's also, once you've got the tour, like, he gets out and says, okay, I'm just going to hitch a ride with somebody. I mean, it makes you think that, like, obviously that's where you'd start your search, right? Wherever he got off, looking for the van. Of course, the van may have moved. He may have moved the van subsequent to that, but, like, that's certainly where you'd want to begin because it's very strange. It's very strange.
Well, there's one more communication from Gabby's phone, which her parents believe was not her, essentially saying that they're trying to go into Yosemite, but there was never a mention of Yosemite. They were speaking to the shop owner about Yellowstone. They were in the Tetons, and they don't believe that was Gabby as of the 30th, which would somewhat be corroborated with the fact that he was hitchhiking alone. I'm sure the police are going to be looking closely at all of the activity on our social media accounts to see if they can corroborate that story at all that was told to the people picking up the hitchhiker. And how lucky do they feel? It really, don't pick up hitchhikers. Just don't
yeah, it's not 1968 anymore. And even when it was 1968, it wasn't a good idea.
So Laundry returns all the way back from Grand Teton to Florida with her van without her. He then, the Petito family, the Laundry family gets a lawyer, and they refer police to the lawyer. And then I think the lawyer released a statement saying, we don't know what Brian knows, or that's what his family said. That's the bottom line. We're hopeful to talk to him. He needs to talk to us. We need to know exactly where he was, where she was, their last locations. And the fact he was back. Oh no, sorry. I think this is their stepfather. And then the lawyers came out with for Brian Laundrie. Many people wondering why Mr. Laundrie would not make a statement or speak with law enforcement in the face of Miss Petito's absence. In my experience, intimate partners are often the first person law enforcement focuses their attention on in cases like this. And the warning that any statement made will be used against you is true, regardless of whether my client had anything to do with Miss Petito's disappearance. As such, on the advice of counsel, Mr. Laundrie, there's a lot of typos here in what I'm reading, is not speaking on the matter. I have been informed that the Northport, Florida police have named Brian Laundrie as a person of interest in this matter. The formality has not really changed the circumstance of Mr. Laundrie being the focus of the attention of law enforcement, and Mr. Laundrie will continue to remain silent on the advice of counsel. And if I was Gabby's father, I would be fucking livid right now that somebody with information, even through a solicitor, is pleading the fifth. And it's just really, it's just painful.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing for her family to feel but anger and outrage and confusion at Brian's behavior and his refusal to take questions. I will say that if you are guilty, this is the correct strategy.
Yes.
You know,
the FBI, I've listened to a few FBI agents, retired FBI agents. I think every news channel interviews somebody who's got some experience with an investigation like this, and all of which said it's not unusual for him to plead or to take advice from his lawyer. That's what his lawyer's saying, not what his family's saying, not what he's saying. And his lawyer is saying exactly the right thing for that situation for him legally. However, it's just really problematic that, the less he speaks, the
louder he speaks.
yeah, that's very well. Actually, I was trying to figure out how to word it. And I don't think you could have worded that any better. And I think, Brian really needs to, in my view, I'm just going to share this because I'm frustrated in that situation. This is something that I couldn't get out of my head. It's such a selfish move because you are not going to get away from the police. And what concerns me is maybe he, if something happened where, let's say, he's defending himself. I'm not making assumptions that's the case. You worry, not necessarily for his health if he's done something to Gabby, but if he's running off to commit suicide or to take his life or something to that effect. There's information that he has that I think it desperately what's the word I'm looking for? It couldn't be any more urgent to find his whereabouts and get him talking. I think the fact that he's run off means the police can they apprehend him now that he's done a runner.
Maybe I'm reading. I've read that officials reported that Laundrie has gone missing, but I don't know.
As of Tuesday he did.
Is that missing, or is that the family knows where he is and is not disclosing his location? And if you want to talk to him, you'll have to arrest him, because really you don't have to talk to the police. You never have to talk to the police unless they unless they have probable cause for an arrest warrant and can arrest you and bring you in. You don't have to respond to them. You don't have to go to their station for questioning. You don't have to tell them he's not under arrest. You know what I mean? Legally, he has no obligation to the police whatsoever. So is he missing in the sense that even his family doesn't know where he is? Has he really gone off and that, maybe he's, starting to contemplate the seriousness of what transpired? Like, I'm speculating, obviously, and that he knows something and is now perhaps contemplating taking a drastic action of some sort? Or is it that he's missing in the sense that the police don't know where he is and no one who knows is willing to tell them, which is a slightly different, because I just noticing that what I'm reading is that officials reported that Laundrie went missing, but I don't know what that means really.
Yeah, there's a point where I wonder if can you get a warrant on a person because he's necessary in finding Gabby. If we
need an arrest warrant, I don't think you can have maybe a material witness warrant, and maybe that's where they're going or could go. But again, since they can't prove anything at all, this is the problem with a missing persons case. You can't prove that Gabby's not alive and well someplace.
He could be
obviously it's starting. Yeah, it's starting to, you obviously have to suspect otherwise, but the police can't prove a crime. So how do you produce a material witness to something that didn't happen or that you can't prove happened?
It's really complicated, and it's something we're going to keep an eye on. It's and I think you would agree with me. We all hope that somehow Gabby is found alive and well.
Absolutely.
We hope the police can find Brian and get as much info as they can out of him. They do have his phone, which was turned over by his lawyer. And they're going to be looking through. They have the van, so they're going to be looking at everything. And I think what makes it extra challenging is Gabby's stepfather is out in Grand Teton National Park. However, she could be anywhere between Grand Teton and Florida. We don't know where she was. How they got separated, what happened, and there's a lot of roadway between Teton and North Point, Florida.
Yeah. And by the way, it is just to clarify, I'm looking at something. Apparently, it is his family who now claims that they have not spoken to him or seen him since the 17th of September, which was only yesterday. You know, again, they're saying that to the authorities. That what does that mean? You know what I mean? That's hard. It's hard to know.
Yeah, and it's difficult to know what happens, what's happening. I always watch, read, Twitter or see the comments on these videos, and no doubt, this is one of the few times where it's difficult to pull any other kind of conclusion outside of he had some involvement one way or the other. And running at this stage has pretty much put a bigger target on his back than he had in the first place. I think coming home on his own was problematic enough.
Yes, it was. And fact check, by the way, you were right. It was Tuesday that they claimed that they hadn't
Tuesday,
seen him since Tuesday the 14th, not yesterday.
So if you're still watching this part, by the way, we are gonna pick this up again as things progress. Maybe not for a couple weeks, but if you're still here, please like and subscribe. We are getting close to 100 subscribers, and that is incredible.